Welcome to my channel, where mysteries are uncovered and truths come to light. If you're captivated by the world of crime and the intricacies of human behavior, you've found the right place. Here, we dive deep into real-life cases that have gripped the world, examining the evidence and unraveling the secrets behind them. Join me as we explore these compelling cases and seek to understand the complexities that lie beneath the surface. Before we begin, please be aware that this video contains descriptions of real-life events, including physical, sexual, and psychological violence, death, criminal behavior, crime scene details, and other graphic and disturbing content that may not be suitable for all viewers. Viewer discretion is strongly advised, as some may find these topics distressing or triggering. If you find the content distressing, we recommend stopping the video, as your well-being is important to us. Today, we're delving into the heartbreaking story of Jill Cahill, a woman whose life was cut short by the person who should have been her protector, her husband, Jeff Cahill. This case, marked by extreme violence, legal failures, and a system that could not protect Jill, remains a stark reminder of the need for reforms in handling domestic violence. Throughout this video, we will discuss the events that led up to Jill's death, the failed legal proceedings, and the consequences this tragedy had on laws surrounding domestic violence. So, without further ado, let's begin. Jill Cahill, born and raised in Syracuse, New York, was known for her warm, vivacious personality. She was the type of person who easily made friends, always looking out for others and bringing light to those around her. Those who knew Jill described her as intelligent, compassionate, and fiercely independent. Her bright spirit shone through in her work as a graphic designer, a career she pursued with creativity and passion. Outside of work, she was deeply involved in her community and cherished her close-knit circle of friends and family, particularly her sister, who she shared a special bond with. Jill's life, however, took a dramatic turn when she met Jeff Cahill. Jeff was initially everything one might hope for in a partner: charming, attentive, and seemingly supportive. He came across as a confident and charismatic man, which quickly drew Jill in. Friends recall how smitten Jill seemed in the early stages of their relationship, describing her as glowing with happiness. Jeff presented himself as a hard-working man, making his living as a mechanic, and appeared to share Jill's enthusiasm for building a future together. They married in 1994, and for a time, it seemed that Jill had found someone who could match her energy and ambitions. Yet, behind Jeff's seemingly perfect exterior lurked a darker side that only began to emerge once the couple had settled into married life. Like many abusive relationships, the descent into violence didn't happen overnight. Jeff started with small acts of control, subtle manipulations that would gradually erode Jill's sense of autonomy. At first, it was requests to spend less time with her friends and more time with him. Soon after, he began criticizing her appearance, her career, and her decisions, often under the guise of concern or wanting the best for her. Slowly, Jill's once vibrant social life began to dwindle, as Jeff isolated her from the people who cared about her most. As time went on, Jeff's behavior became more overtly controlling and abusive. Friends and family began noticing troubling changes in Jill. She grew quieter, less confident, and seemed to constantly be on edge. Her normally outgoing and independent nature was replaced with an anxious, withdrawn version of herself. It was clear that something was deeply wrong, but like many victims of domestic abuse, Jill struggled to talk openly about what was happening behind closed doors. The signs of control were becoming more apparent. Jeff monitored her phone calls, kept tabs on her whereabouts, and criticized her every move, slowly chipping away at her self-esteem. Despite the red flags, Jill found it difficult to leave the marriage. The psychological hold Jeff had on her was profound. Like many abusers, Jeff would vacillate between bouts of cruelty and moments of remorse, apologizing profusely after each incident and promising to change. These apologies, combined with a complex mix of fear, love, and hope, kept Jill trapped in the relationship. She clung to the belief that Jeff would become the man she once thought he was, but as time went on, his violence only escalated. Behind the scenes, Jill was enduring increasing levels of verbal, emotional, and eventually, physical abuse. Jeff's temper grew more volatile, and the outbursts of anger became more frequent. He would lash out over trivial matters, often leaving Jill in tears. Despite her suffering, Jill kept much of the abuse hidden from her loved ones, perhaps out of shame or fear of judgment. She would often make excuses for Jeff's behavior, downplaying the seriousness of the situation when her family raised concerns. The violence had a ripple effect not only on Jill, but also on their 2 young children. The couple had a son and a daughter, both of whom had witnessed their parents' volatile relationship for years. Though not present during the actual attacks, the children were deeply affected by the instability in their home, often caught in the crossfire of Jeff's emotional manipulation and Jill's efforts to shield them from the worst of his behavior. In April 1998, the abuse in Jill and Jeff Cahill's home reached a terrifying climax. Jeff, consumed by rage during a heated argument, brutally attacked Jill in their Cicero, New York home. Grabbing a baseball bat, he struck her repeatedly, inflicting devastating injuries. Jill suffered a fractured skull and severe head trauma, leaving her clinging to life. Rushed to the hospital in critical condition, she underwent multiple surgeries and weeks of treatment as doctors fought to save her. Jeff was arrested and charged with attempted murder, but even as he sat behind bars, Jill feared for her life. The children were placed in the care of relatives, and Jill's family rallied around her as she fought to recover. Yet, despite the brutal nature of the assault and Jill's near-fatal injuries, the justice system would soon fail her in ways no one could have anticipated. Despite the horrifying nature of the attack on Jill Cahill, the legal system tragically failed to provide her with the protection she so desperately needed. After the brutal assault in April 1998, Jeff Cahill was arrested and charged with attempted murder. Given the severity of Jill's injuries, multiple skull fractures, severe head trauma, and a long, painful recovery, the charges were appropriate, and many believed Jeff would remain behind bars as he awaited trial. However, what happened next revealed glaring flaws in the legal system's handling of domestic violence cases. Let's take a quick break. Did you know that most viewers enjoy content like this, but never hit that subscribe button? If you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving it a thumbs up. Your support makes a huge difference and helps me keep bringing you more compelling stories like this one. Thanks for being here. Shockingly, Jeff Cahill was released on bail just weeks after the attack. His release came despite overwhelming evidence of the violence he had inflicted on Jill, the clear danger he posed to her, and the fact that she had only narrowly survived. Even with the gravity of the charges against him, the court permitted Jeff's release under the condition that he stay away from Jill. A restraining order was issued, but as is tragically common in cases involving domestic violence, a piece of paper was not enough to keep Jill safe. For Jill, the news of Jeff's release was terrifying. She knew better than anyone what Jeff was capable of, and she feared that the violence would escalate. Jeff's history of manipulation, control, and now near-lethal violence was undeniable. Jill had done everything she was supposed to do. She had reported the abuse, cooperated with law enforcement, and secured a restraining order. Yet, even with these measures in place, she felt vulnerable, knowing that her abuser was now free. Her fear wasn't just psychological, it was rooted in the grim reality that Jeff had already tried to kill her once, and now he had another opportunity. The legal system's failure to keep Jeff incarcerated after such a violent attack raised serious concerns. Domestic violence experts and advocacy groups pointed to Jill's case as a prime example of the gaps in the system when it comes to protecting victims. Even with a clear history of abuse and a near-deadly assault, Jeff Cahill's release on bail showed just how little the system prioritized the safety of victims over the rights of the accused. The fact that someone who had nearly beaten his wife to death was allowed to walk free sent a chilling message, not just to Jill, but to victims of domestic violence everywhere. Jill's pleas for help fell on deaf ears. Despite the restraining order, despite the obvious danger, the courts had failed to recognize the severity of the threat Jeff posed. In the eyes of the law, he was simply awaiting trial. But for Jill, it was a death sentence in waiting. She was painfully aware of how relentless Jeff could be, and tragically, her worst fears would soon come true. Just 6 months after the brutal baseball bat assault, Jill Cahill's worst nightmare became a tragic reality. In October 1998, despite her brave efforts to recover and the restraining order in place, Jill was murdered by her husband, Jeff Cahill, in an act of premeditated, cold-blooded violence. Jill had been recovering in a hospital in Syracuse, New York, where she was undergoing treatment for the severe injuries Jeff had inflicted during the initial attack. Tragically, even in the hospital, a place where she should have been safe, Jill was not out of Jeff's reach. While Jeff was out on bail, awaiting trial for the attempted murder, he meticulously plotted how he would finish what he had started. He obtained cyanide, a lethal poison, and disguised himself to gain access to the hospital. On October 27, Jeff snuck into Jill's room, undetected by hospital staff. In an act that was as calculated as it was monstrous, Jeff injected Jill with the cyanide, quickly leaving the scene before anyone realized what had happened. The poison rapidly took effect, and despite the efforts of the medical team, Jill succumbed to the toxic injection. Jill's death was a shocking and devastating blow to her family, friends, and the community. After surviving a near-fatal assault, she had been trying to rebuild her life, but the system had failed her at every turn. The restraining order, meant to protect her, had done nothing to stop Jeff from carrying out his deadly plan. The legal system's decision to release him on bail ultimately allowed him the opportunity to finish his violent mission, making Jill a victim not just of Jeff's cruelty, but also of institutional failures. Her murder underscored the grim reality that restraining orders and legal protections are not always enough to safeguard victims from dangerous abusers. Jeff Cahill, who should have been behind bars, had exploited these loopholes, leaving the question of how Jill's death could have been prevented. Following Jill Cahill's tragic death, authorities wasted no time in launching an intensive investigation into her murder. Given Jeff Cahill's violent history and the ongoing case of attempted murder from his April 1998 attack, he was the immediate suspect. Investigators quickly pieced together the events leading up to the killing, uncovering a deeply disturbing and premeditated plot. Jeff had meticulously planned his wife's murder from the moment he was released on bail, determined to silence her permanently and avoid facing justice for the earlier assault. Key to the investigation was the discovery of how Jeff had obtained the cyanide, a deadly substance not easily accessible. Investigators learned that Jeff had conducted careful research into poisons and managed to acquire cyanide through illegal channels. He knew the lethal dose required and how quickly it would act, showing a level of cold calculation that shocked even seasoned law enforcement officers. This was not a crime of passion. It was a methodical plan aimed at ensuring Jill would not survive to testify against him in court. Jeff's actions were not those of a man acting in desperation. On the contrary, he waited patiently for the right moment to strike. He disguised himself to avoid detection, slipping into the hospital under false pretenses. Staff at the hospital, unaware of Jeff's deadly intentions, had no reason to suspect the man who entered Jill's room that fateful day. This allowed him to administer the cyanide injection and leave before anyone could intervene. When Jill's condition suddenly worsened, medical staff scrambled to save her, but the effects of the poison were irreversible. Jill's death was agonizing and swift, and by the time doctors realized what had happened, it was too late. The prosecution's case against Jeff was ironclad. They presented a chilling narrative of a man who had beaten his wife nearly to death, then manipulated the legal system to secure his freedom, only to return and ensure she would never recover. Evidence of Jeff's premeditation was overwhelming. Investigators uncovered his internet search history, which revealed detailed research on poisons, along with his acquisition of cyanide just days before the murder. Testimony from witnesses, including Jill's family and medical personnel, painted a damning picture of Jeff's manipulation and control over Jill, even after his arrest. In 1999, Jeff Cahill was tried and convicted of first-degree murder. His defense team argued for leniency, citing mental health issues and claiming he acted out of desperation. However, the jury was unmoved by these arguments. The evidence of Jeff's calculated actions, coupled with the brutal nature of Jill's death, left no doubt about his guilt. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never have the chance to harm anyone again. While Jeff's conviction brought some measure of justice for Jill's family, it could not undo the devastation he had caused. Her murder left a lasting impact on her loved ones, who had watched her suffer through years of abuse only to be failed by a system that should have protected her. The trial highlighted the glaring weaknesses in domestic violence protections, and Jeff's ability to carry out the murder while out on bail exposed the deep flaws in the legal framework meant to safeguard victims. Jill Cahill's murder became a chilling wake-up call that exposed critical gaps in the legal system, particularly in how it handles domestic violence cases. Her death, while a personal tragedy for her family and friends, resonated far beyond Syracuse, New York, sparking widespread outrage and conversations about the inadequacies in the protection of domestic abuse victims. Jill's story was a heartbreaking example of how restraining orders, bail conditions, and legal proceedings can fall devastatingly short in safeguarding those most at risk. In the wake of Jill's murder, her family, particularly her sister, became vocal advocates for domestic violence reform. They channeled their grief into action, determined to prevent other families from experiencing the same devastating loss. One of the most significant reforms to emerge from Jill's case was a push for stricter bail conditions in cases involving violent offenders, especially those with a history of domestic abuse. Advocacy groups rallied around the cause, calling for an overhaul of the justice system's approach to dealing with abusers who pose a clear and ongoing threat to their victims. Lawmakers in New York were compelled to take action in response to the public outcry. One of the most prominent changes was the introduction of new legislation aimed at tightening restrictions on bail for those charged with violent domestic crimes. Under the new guidelines, judges were given more discretion to deny bail in cases where there was a clear risk to the victim's safety, addressing the exact loophole that allowed Jeff Cahill to be released. This legislative shift was widely seen as a direct response to the tragic failings in Jill Cahill's case, and was a crucial step toward ensuring that victims of domestic violence could receive the protection they needed. Jill's case also led to heightened awareness of the limitations of restraining orders, which, as her tragic murder demonstrated, are often not enough to stop determined abusers. This realization fueled ongoing debates about the effectiveness of protective measures and what more could be done to strengthen the enforcement of such orders. Some called for the implementation of electronic monitoring for offenders like Jeff, who had a clear history of violence and had already violated the conditions of his bail. Others advocated for better training for law enforcement and hospital staff to recognize the signs of escalating danger in domestic abuse cases. In addition to legislative changes, Jill's murder became a symbol for the broader issue of domestic violence awareness. Victim advocacy groups began using her story to educate the public about the dangers faced by abuse survivors, even after they have sought legal recourse. Her case was cited in numerous campaigns aimed at improving support systems for victims and emphasizing the importance of early intervention to prevent further tragedies. Jill's family participated in many of these initiatives, ensuring that her legacy would be one of change and progress. While the reforms inspired by Jill Cahill's case brought some sense of justice to her memory, her death remains a painful reminder of the lives lost to domestic violence and the urgent need for continued efforts in prevention and victim protection. Jill's story continues to resonate with advocates, law enforcement, and survivors, serving as both a warning and a call to action that more must be done to protect those trapped in abusive relationships before it's too late. The murder of Jill Cahill is more than just a tragic story, it is a call to action. Her death shines a light on the critical failures in our justice system and the importance of protecting victims of domestic violence. While Jeff Cahill is now behind bars, the pain and loss felt by Jill's family can never be erased. As we conclude this video, I urge everyone watching to take this story to heart. Whether it's supporting local domestic violence organizations, advocating for stronger laws, or simply educating yourself and others about the warning signs of abuse, there are steps we can all take to help prevent tragedies like Jill's from happening again. Thank you for watching this detailed look into the murder of Jill Cahill. If you or someone you know is in a domestic violence situation, please seek help and know that there are resources available. Stay safe and take care.